Welcome to the Rideshare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
So Tobenna is the founder of CloudTrucks, a virtual trucking carrier that helps owner-operators manage their business and make more money. The company has raised over $26 million in funding from top investors in Silicon Valley. Tobenna actually sold his last company, a remote operations company called Scotty Labs, to DoorDash in 2019. So Tobenna really has a lot of experience, I guess you would say, in a number of disciplines that we care about here on the podcast. So I'm excited to chat with you, Tobenna. How are you doing?
Good. Nice to be here.
Yeah, you know what? I actually didn't realize that, I knew you had founded a company before, but I guess I never really looked into it that much in depth until I was getting ready to interview you on the podcast. And I saw it was Scotty Labs. Okay, interesting. Don't know what they do. Sold to DoorDash. Okay, I'm assuming this is something I care about. And then I looked into, and I didn't get the whole picture, but it looks like it's a teleoperations company. So I'm curious to know, this isn't your first rodeo in the logistics and mobility industry. Tell me briefly about Scotty Labs and kind of how that went.
Yeah, so at Scotty Labs, we were working on kind of like the future of driving, right? So we had this view that people wanted to be closer to home, and really we were focused on the trucking industry. But I can get to how the DoorDash thing happened. So we were focused on trucking industry. We felt like truck drivers and different conversations we had with them wanted to be closer to home, and we wanted to build an autonomous and remote operations technology that really enabled them to do this. One thing that was unique about the company was that we did not believe that autonomy was going to replace humans. We actually believed that drivers would still remain in the trucks, but hours of service rules were going to change over time. And so that's what we were working towards. DoorDash ended up becoming a customer to the company for some of the technology that we had built, and then ultimately decided to acquire the company.
Got it. Okay. Very cool. And I mean, so it seemed like, I guess I didn't realize, so your initial, I guess foray with that company was more for truck driving and those folks, but DoorDash just liked the technology and everything that was going on there?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So how did the idea for CloudTrucks come about? Because you mentioned something interesting, autonomous, right? Like I actually feel like a lot of the investment and interest and even news stories in trucking right now, if you're sort of ignoring, from the ground level, the drivers and all that, right? Like what we see talked about in the media is often a lot more autonomous, right? Everyone's like loves autonomy when it comes to trucking. And I guess I was going to make a joke about your company not being autonomous, but it sounds like you already tried that.
Yeah. So at Scotty, we were spending so much time with truck drivers, right? And really thinking about the future of trucking, and just trying to understand everything that was happening at the trucking industry on a holistic level. And the more time we spent with truck drivers, the more we realized that truck drivers needed a lot of help with the business of trucking, right? So people would throw out all these stats of the increasing age of the average truck driver. So it's like 55 years older, 90-something% of truck drivers actually leave the company that they work at within the first year. But if you spend time talking to the drivers on the ground, they would tell you that like they really wanted to be independent in trucking, right? This isn't gig work; it's their life. If you're working as a company driver, the company is basically determining where you go and how long you stay on the road. So they wanted to be able to take control of their time, make decisions on whether they wanted to be on the road for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The problem was that it was getting more and more complex to become an independent truck driver, to become an owner operator. Insurance was getting much more expensive. So the idea for CloudTrucks actually came from interacting with truck drivers while I was at Scotty, and really coming to realize that they needed a lot of help with the business of trucking. And so we decided to build a business to solve those problems that they were facing.
Very cool. Yeah. And I think that's sort of how you first got on my radar with CloudTrucks, because a lot of the, you mentioned that it's not gig work, but actually I see a lot of parallels between the two. I mean, it's sort of obvious. I mean, you are driving from point A to point B in a very different vehicle and under different circumstances, but a lot of the issues, and we'll get into some of the products that you've released for truck drivers, because I know some of the products you've released for truck drivers, I noticed, are actually the exact same ones that are most popular with gig workers. So we'll talk about that. But just to set the stage a little too, for those who may not know, I mean, talk a little about the trucking industry. I want to say there's 3 million truck drivers, and you are specifically focused on owner operators, right? What percentage of truck drivers make up owner operators?
Yeah, so there's 3.5 million truck drivers. There are about 350,000 owner operators, according to OIDA, which is the Owner Operator Association. So roughly 10% are owner operators. Now, I think that is undercounted a little bit, because you also have this concept of owner operators who lease onto a larger carrier. So they're basically working as contractors, but under the umbrella of a different carrier. So if you add that in, we're probably closer to 500,000 or more.
Okay. Cool. So it's, I guess, a big market on an absolute basis, but overall compared, I mean, most people, I mean, for the reasons you might imagine, right? I mean, a big rig truck is expensive. The insurance is expensive. I mean, really the problem you're trying to solve is because, only 10% of them are doing it. Do you see opportunity to sort of penetrate that 10% or even convert more of the industry to the owner operator model?
We've had a lot of success with both. We've had much more applications coming from people who are currently company drivers and are trying to become owner operators for the first time, and really just looking for someone to help them out, simple solutions that they can use to enter that industry and keep their costs as low as possible.
Yeah. So what does it take to become a truck driver with CloudTrucks? And also, I guess, sort of what's the 60-second pitch to a truck driver? I guess, convince me, what do you say to convince someone to come sign up with you?
Yeah. So look, there are different types of customers that we focus on, but the overarching pitch is simple. There are thousands of brokers out there. It's very hard to decide where to find jobs, which jobs to take, where you should go in the country. After you found a job, it's really hard to get paid. So most brokers will pay you in 30 days, 45 days. You have to chase down these checks. And it's just like really difficult to manage everything in your business, insurance, compliance, all of that. CloudTrucks gives you one single solution, right? So one app with back office staff to really support you, so you can focus on driving. And that's really the pitch. So it's a pitch of, we will help you make better decisions on revenue. So like which jobs to take or not take, and help you expand your revenue. We will help improve your cash flow by paying you instantly, consistently, and with full transparency. So you don't have to worry about chasing anybody down for your money. And we will help you lower your costs. So we'll take on the burden of getting insurance and other things that you typically have to pay for to keep your costs as low as possible.
Is there one pain point that drivers are having that that they love CloudTrucks for? I mean, obviously you offer a suite of benefits and products and services, but is there one thing when people hear it, they say, okay, I'm signing up right now?
Yeah, I mean, the way I like to think about it is more money and simplicity. You see this across a lot of different industries. It's not just the more money. I actually like to be careful with that, right? So you see across many different industries that people value simplicity, like people value minimizing their headaches, so to speak, right? Like people don't want to go around with hundreds of things in their heads. So the simplicity aspect of things is definitely a core value, in addition to the more money aspect of things. I think those two things going together is really what makes CloudTrucks unique. A lot of companies might be pitching the more money pitch, but I think you need to kind of marry these two things together to really have a product that truck drivers love.
Yeah. Well, I will say that, we work with a lot of companies and interview a lot of founders who are doing things, either for gig economy or independent owner operators. And, I think often the focus is looking at, what are these alternative services? But I actually do think a lot of times, we kind of all care about money and making more money. So it's not, the sexiest thing to say, but, I think it is, right up there. It may not be the only reason someone does something, but, with gig work, for example, the two, overwhelming things that people always say why they're working in the gig economy autonomy is the pay and the flexibility, right?
Yep.
So I think it is, like you said, right, the money and the simplicity, it makes sense to me. And so I'm curious to know, how do you make drivers more money? Is it, you mentioned the sort of schedule optimization, which jobs to take. Do you also provide lead gen, or how do you like, I'm a driver. I come to you. I'm making $1,000 a week, and now I'm making $1,500. Where does that $500 a week come from, for example?
Yeah, so it's a number of things. So first off is, think of it as almost like a CRM, right? There are thousands of different brokers out there. Before a driver comes to us, what they're doing is maybe they're downloading multiple apps developed by each of these brokers, and they're doing the same search over and over. So the first thing that we do is we aggregate all of this stuff in one interface, right? And then we're doing the optimization on top of that. So that gives them access to.
Is that how they?
Jobs.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is that how they get most of their jobs, though? Is it through apps, or I imagine there's a lot of word of mouth, or even phone calls, old school, recurring, repeating customers? How are they getting most of their jobs in the first place?
So it varies by driver, but what you're seeing in the industry now is things are moving from phone calls being the primary way that they're getting jobs to apps being the primary way that they're getting jobs. This was really pushed by companies like Uber Freight, Convoy, and now you've seen other companies in the industry really starting to push this as well. So everybody basically has an app at this point.
Okay, got it. So they're all kind of getting their jobs from these apps. You guys help with kind of organizing all of those leads, and I assume that's, to me, kind of makes things more simple. Is that's not making them more money yet? How is it, helping them earn more?
Yeah, exactly. So after we've organized all of these leads in one place, then we do the optimization on top of it. So think of the fact that a truck driver has to make a decision pretty much every week, right? Or every 2 weeks, depending on what their schedule is. The decision is, I am in LA and I can go anywhere in the country. Right. So today, the way that a lot of these drivers are working is they open whatever app or they call whatever local broker and they say, hey, I'm in LA. I'm ready to go anywhere. And then the person tells them, well, I have a load going from LA to Dallas. Right. And then they take that load to Dallas. The problem is it might be that Dallas is actually a terrible place for you to go to for that specific week, because you might not be able to find something going from Dallas back to LA, or from Dallas to Virginia and then Virginia to LA, right? So what we do is, with this schedule optimizer, we're basically saying, like, tell us where you are and where you want to be at the end of the week or in 2 weeks. And then we just build a full schedule. So we have an understanding of what's going on in the market at any given point in time. And we basically say, like, you should go LA to Virginia, Virginia to Dallas, Dallas back, right? So that optimization is what ultimately makes you more money, because we're looking at it at a global scale, like what's really going on in the country at any given point in time.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it's kind of one of the reasons why, I'm no expert in truck driving. That if that's not apparent by now, it definitely will be by the end of this interview. But it's one of the reasons why I love studying comparable industries in the logistics space, is because, for example, Uber and Lyft have millions, or, actually at this point, probably billions of data points out there. And, a few years ago, they launched a feature called Next Trip for drivers, right? So it's actually kind of sounds pretty similar. It knows exactly where you're going. And then by the time you get to your next trip, it's sending you your next request before you even have to wait. Now, this is, happening with truck drivers, much less frequently, right? Like you said, they're only making this type of decision once every week or two. But I think that a lot of the same dynamics, the density required for something like that to work, and kind of just how popular it is with, gig workers, for example, translates over. Because I do really agree with you. And sometimes I think the challenge with some of these apps for owner operators, whether they're gig workers or people renting out fleets of cars or truck drivers in this case, is that a lot of people don't want to have to do a lot of extra work, right? They kind of want, the Uber driver app is amazing. You turn it on and just keep sending you trips, right? You don't have to do anything. You don't have to think. Just do what the app tells you. You don't have to use third-party apps or, all these other, think, or, which request should I take or not? And I think that's how most, kind of independent or owner-operator folks think about it. I'm curious to know, in your experience with truck drivers, you mentioned simplicity a couple times. Are they do they want to be involved in this process, or do they want you to just kind of do the best job optimizing, tell them where to go, when to go, and kind of how to maximize their income?
Yeah, we've seen a difference in behavior. So I think the driver who has been a business owner for many years wants to be involved in the decision, right? So they use the optimizer to get a sense of like, what is it telling them is going on in the market right now, and then they're basically trying to beat it, right? So they're like, this is base case how I should perform this week, and then they try to beat it themselves. Maybe they call a broker, maybe they book stuff on our app, like whatever. And then the person who is new to the industry, so they're not a new truck driver. We only work with drivers who have over 3 years of experience right now, but they are first-time business owners. That person is relying on the optimizer even more, and this is how they're getting a better understanding of what's going on in the industry as a whole. The other thing that's very interesting about trucking is that there are all of these negotiations that also happen, right, between the driver and the broker. So today, the way we help facilitate those negotiations is by having something called a CT estimate. So for every single job in our app, either the broker already provided a price or they didn't provide a price. They actually want the driver to call them to negotiate a price. And what used to happen is you can imagine, right? Like the broker has a lot of information. They know what's actually happening in the market. They have their computer, right? The driver is out there on the road. So the driver would call and they're negotiating typically based on some price that they've had in the past for that specific lane. But with CloudTrucks, what we have is something called a CT estimate. Any single job on our app will have this CT estimate. It's a range. It's basically high and low of what we believe that this job will go for. So when you call and you're negotiating with confidence, right? Like what's actually happening.
Got it.
So that's the other way that we just help the drivers beyond just the schedule optimizer.
Got it. And so just for background, so I know, I mean, with these brokers, I mean, that sounds like typically, I guess when you say broker, there's like, let's say a company, well, I was going to say Walmart, but I know they've got their own truck drivers. So let's say you have some grocery store that needs something, delivered from Los Angeles to Dallas. They're going to go through a broker who then finds a driver to do that. And so these are all happening, or not all, but 10%, I guess, of these loads are happening on an individual level, it sounds like, through a broker most likely.
Yeah, pretty much. Even more than that, because the brokers help service not just the owner-operators, but also the small companies. So the companies that have up to 5 trucks, 10 trucks, they would still work with a broker. Sometimes a company that has like 50 trucks would still work with a broker for certain lanes, right? So brokers play a really critical role in the industry because it's really fragmented at the carrier level. So the carrier is the one who's actually moving that freight from point A to point B. So the brokers are basically helping to match those shippers to the carrier.
Got it. So last question on this, and it's really interesting, so I appreciate you sharing all the detail. And last question, I promise, before we move on. I am curious, though, the underlying data that you're providing, that you're basing, like you're brokering, your low to high estimate. I feel like a lot of apps just across, transportation and logistics, they see this opportunity to, optimize the schedule or, help drivers make more money. It's not always necessarily, there's more lead gen is one function, but there's also the optimization piece of it. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But I feel like more often than not, the information or the data, because you have to do it at scale, right? So people are pulling, for example, from like weather APIs or just the information. They're providing info, but it's not clear like how well that information translates into value. So I'm curious if there's a specific example or what are you looking at for specifically, that's very unique or that's something where these drivers say like, oh, I can't get that on my own, whether it's, we've seen good examples in the past of like crowdsourced, airport queuing data. So you literally can only get that through an app that aggregates it from drivers who are sitting there at the airport, for example, right? And like that type of feature is now very powerful versus something that, predicts demand based off weather and traffic and, like event patterns, right? You can plug into all of those APIs pretty easily. But as a driver, you can also just think about those off the top of your head. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know like, oh, when it's snowing, there aren't that many drivers and people will pay more to get things places. So curious to hear what you think there.
Yeah, so the way I like to think about this stuff is before innovation, you basically want to give people access, right? So I made this point earlier. There are lots of data sources in the freight market, right? Brokers typically have access to those data sources and have learned over time how to read them. The problem is that the truck driver didn't have access to those data sources or didn't know how to read them, right? So our first job is like, let's plug into the right sources of information, and then let's provide that data in a very easy way to consume to these drivers. So the easy way to consume is on every single load, we will just tell you, here's what we believe is the high, here's what we believe is the low. So that's step one. Now, obviously, as we start to grow, right, we also have access to our transaction data. So here's what we thought that this was going to go for, but here's what it actually went for, and then we're using that to improve our models. So over time, we have more and more proprietary data, and we know what to do with that data. But the first step that we actually just had was, let's just give the driver access to the information that other people in the ecosystem have today, because that's what they're using to gain the advantage, right, in these negotiations. So like, let's just provide that same level of access.
Got it. So I want to shift a little bit to some of the more macro trends in the industry. And, I also saw that you guys announced a partnership with Uber Freight, because, one thing I was wondering is that this kind of sounds a lot like Uber Freight. And, when I went to the CloudTrucks website, it really seemed like it was geared towards drivers, right? Like, it really seems like you're trying to sign up drivers. So I'm curious to know what you think about, are there other players doing this? I was going to ask you if Uber Freight was a competitor, but since you teamed up with them, I assume they're not a direct competitor, right?
Yeah. So the way the industry is structured is shipper, broker, carrier, right? CloudTrucks is effectively a carrier. We take on the responsibility of moving freight from point A to point B. Uber Freight is a broker, so they have to match the shipper to the carrier. The right way to think about this is our customer is the driver. You're absolutely right. It's completely geared towards the driver. And every single thing we build and we ship is about like how to help the driver manage their business better. I've said this in other places, but the right way to think about us is think about any company that enables small businesses, right? So in our case, that truck driver is a small business, and we're building all of the different sets of tools that they as a small business need to operate. We're not really like we're not catering to the shipper, not directly, right? Like ultimately we have to move freight for the shipper, but the way we think about it is the driver is our customer. Like every single day when we wake up, we're thinking about how to make that driver's life better.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's really this interesting opportunity and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately in sort of building out a suite of services, whether you call it a Shopify for, independent owner operators, but it seems like there's a certain scale at which it does and doesn't make sense, right? When you kind of go down to, frankly, like a gig worker, an Uber or Lyft driver who's making $15 to $20 per hour, and I don't know that it makes as much sense to build out this huge suite of services, even though the need is clearly there. And it seems like, when you get up onto the opposite end of the spectrum and, maybe the pay is, maybe more for a truck driver comparable depending on who you ask and who you talk to and the experience level. But, the contracts are much bigger, right? And so that's sort of how I think about it. I've also seen some software like this applied in the bus industry. So how do you think about, I'm just curious to get your opinion on that. Like, do you think you sort of need that? Like, did you think about that when you were founding CloudTrucks? Like, hey, if these drivers weren't, if the contracts were smaller, like this might not make sense, or it's harder for us to, have a good value proposition for these folks in our network?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we definitely thought about it. I think you're absolutely right that. Okay, so we wanted to make sure that we were building software that served the individual, right? So you see this in other industries as well. You see companies like Substack building software to serve the writer. So that's how we were thinking about it. We want to build software to serve the individual. You're right that you can't do that in every single industry. Just the dynamics of certain industries make it harder to do that. It just so happens that in the trucking industry, A truck driver, an independent truck driver, is really a small business generating 160 to 200K a year, right? So when you think about it that way, then you start to think, all right, like what type of software
And that's sort of gross revenue, or?
Yes, gross revenue. So then you start to think like, what type of software can I build to help this small business actually operate in a better way, right? So you don't want to go, you can't build like enterprise software, right? You can't charge people ridiculous sums of money, but you can build really good software for a business that's generating that amount of money and help them generate another 20K, 30K, 40K, right? So that's a meaningful difference in the small business owner's life. So that's really the way that we thought about it. So it doesn't apply in every industry, I imagine, but it applies pretty well in trucking. And the truck drivers have a lot of problems, right? Like there's just so much that hadn't been built yet. So we could actually ship something that was making a difference on day one.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the reasons why I've been so interested in the trucking industry, and sort of I wouldn't say that I've studied it, but I've definitely kept my eye on things here and there, over the past few years, because I think the stat stood out to me. It's funny, you said there's now 3.5 million truck drivers. I feel like that must have increased, because I could have sworn when I looked it up before there were only 3 million. So I'm pretty sure that number has gone up, and probably makes sense, now with the pandemic and more things being shipped and all of that. And here I'm in this industry, focused more on Uber and Lyft drivers and pre-pandemic, and now gig workers at large. And there were never more than 2 to 3 million Uber and Lyft drivers in the US, yet there was all of this interest and all of these companies, and like these drivers had a lot of similar problems, I guess you would say. You said at the onset 90% of drivers in the trucking industry don't stay with the company within the first year, I believe. With Uber and Lyft, 2/3 of all drivers quit after 6 months, right? So a lot of the retention and satisfaction issues exist in both industries, but I feel like not nearly as much attention is being paid to the trucking industry. So I'm curious to ask you, you've obviously got this company that's doing really well. What opportunities do you see at large in the trucking industry, either that are complementary to what you're doing or kind of unrelated, but just still a good opportunity? And if someone is interested in kind of serving workers and serving, for me, I have a personal bias towards serving the independent owner operators, but in this industry, what do you see as far as opportunity?
Yeah, I mean the
and you got to limit it to one thing, maybe, because it seemed like you just thought about a lot right there.
No, what I was actually thinking is like the biggest opportunity, I think, is the one that we're trying to solve, which is just helping the individual. I think that just broadly digitization in the industry is good for everyone. So the first layer of digitization was the brokers, right? So bringing a lot of data online, making things more transparent. I think that was great for the industry and great for the driver because they had more transparency. Then you have the ELD companies, electronic logging devices, where drivers are able to log their hours and all of that. I think that has generally been good for the industry. Drivers have certain issues with it, and
drivers weren't fans of it, I know.
they weren't fans of it. I think some of them have come around, but I think as a whole, that's going down the right path. Certainly, some companies out there are certainly going down the right path. The thing that I'm excited about and would love to see more and more, there are certain companies playing in this space, is how to digitize things that happen in the pickup and drop off locations, right? So if you think about this, there's just a lot of waste that happens when drivers go to pick up and drop off at these distribution centers, where a driver has an appointment, they get there, and sometimes they get there on time, and they have to wait like 3 hours, 4 hours long. Like that doesn't help anyone. That's a lot of waste. Sometimes they're arriving late, but it's hard to give an update to that facility and say, hey, I'm going to be 2 hours late because of weather or whatever it is. So I think that's an area that I would love to see a lot more innovation. I think the companies that are playing in that space are definitely doing a good job, but we haven't seen enough in that space. And that's probably the thing that would increase productivity as a whole, much faster than some of the other things that are happening in the industry today.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I see the trucking industry, you could probably educate me, but it seems like it's definitely growing, and, the pandemic has, probably only accelerated the need for a lot of these services. So I'm curious to get your outlook on sort of the future of the industry, itself, and also really curious, how do you think autonomy and self-driving vehicles will affect the trucking industry? Because you are, building, software for independent owner operators, but obviously there are a lot of companies investing in autonomy, and, to be frank, I think there is, a use case when a truck driver is driving for, 10 hours in a row or 8 hours, whatever the limit is, straight down a highway, and there's no pickup, no drop off involved. That's sort of the ideal case for an autonomous vehicle, right?
Yeah, definitely. So my views on the autonomous driving space have always been slightly different from a lot of different people. So I believe that the larger the vehicle and the faster the vehicle has to go, the harder it is just from a societal perspective, the harder it is to actually automate, right? So on the one hand, I believe that autonomy in trucking is a good thing. It's going to lead to fewer accidents. It's going to lead to probably increased hours of service. So like you said, drivers have a limited amount of hours that they can drive today. So I believe that what the role that autonomy is going to play is that it increases the number of hours that vehicle can actually go down the highway for. I do not believe that the driver will be taken out of the vehicle, because I think that the driver will still have to play this role of like, what happens when something goes wrong? Something will go wrong, right? So like what happens when something goes wrong? And even though the highway is easier to automate, the fact that you're talking about a massive vehicle going 65 miles per hour makes it difficult. So that's really what I think is going to happen there. As far as the industry as a whole, earlier in this conversation, I was saying that people talk about the fact that the average age of a truck driver is increasing. It's like 55 years and going up. I think that what's really happening, at least what we're seeing on the ground, is that people want to become truck drivers. It's just that they want to manage their own time, right? So they don't want someone telling them to be on the road for a month. They want to be able to look at their revenue, look at their costs, determine how much money they actually want to take home, and then make that trade-off of like, maybe you want to spend every weekend at home, maybe you want to spend every day at home, and you just understand the trade-offs. So what we're seeing is people in their 20s and 30s actually coming into the industry, working with a company like CloudTrucks is making it easier for them to be business owners, and then deciding like how they want to spend their time. So I think that's going to be the trend. I think you'll just see more and more of this as we do more, and as the industry is more digitized. Like I think you're going to see a lot of growth in the industry.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I guess it's a good note to end on, because I think it leaves CloudTrucks in a very bullish perspective, because I think you're right. I mean, if most truck drivers are older and, kind of phasing out of this line of work, who's going to replace them? It kind of almost has to be the younger ones, and we definitely know that, if you're looking at it, out in the scope right now of the landscape of, kind of gig economy or entry level, or even, like getting into truck driving, anything like kind of in that domain of work, definitely there's a lot of competition out there. Sometimes I think Uber has joked in the past that, their number one competitor for labor is McDonald's, right? And so if you have the option to work 40 hours a week as an Uber driver, make the same amount of money at McDonald's, but you have more control over your schedule at driving for Uber, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? So I think if you take that concept and apply it here with truck driving, it definitely opens up a lot of opportunities. And I know we're getting a lot of interest in our trucking videos and things like that we've been releasing on YouTube, which is our most, I guess you would say, youngest demographic. So I definitely agree there. Really appreciate you coming on. If folks want to learn more about CloudTrucks and even follow yourself, what's the best place they can do that?
Yeah, so just go on cloudtrucks.com, and we have a lot of articles on the website. Yeah. You can read a lot about us there, and you can also follow our Facebook page. I believe it's CloudTrucks HQ, or follow us on Twitter at CloudTrucks.
Perfect. Cool. Well, really appreciate it, Tobenna, and take care.
All right. Thank you.